At Christmas dinner, my son raised his glass and smiled. I prepared this glass specifically for you, Dad. Drink every last drop. Less than an hour later, I felt dizzy. I got up pretending to get my coat from the garage. What I accidentally saw under the cold light behind that door sent a chill down my spine. I told no one. I simply returned to the table, smiled as though nothing happened, and quietly prepared for the most important phone call of my life. I'm incredibly grateful to have you here. Please comment below with the city or country you're watching from to say hello. Also, please note this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or settings is coincidental, but the message I'm conveying is highly useful. Nothing about that Tuesday morning felt like the beginning of anything. That is the detail I keep returning to even now. It was just a Tuesday, the kind of quiet, unremarkable Chicago morning that arrives in late November, like an old habit, gray sky pressing low over the lake, a thin crust of frost on the penthouse windows, the smell of coffee spreading through rooms that had learned over the years to hold silence without making it feel like absence. My name is Robert Callahan, 74 years old. 38 years as a structural engineer in this city bridges overpasses load-bearing frameworks that still stand along the lakefront and out toward the western suburbs. I built things designed to last. That was always the point. You do not construct a bridge to be admired. You construct it to hold. I retired 6 years ago, and I will be honest with you. The way I was trained to be honest with numbers, I did not miss the work as much as I expected to. What I missed was the certainty of it. The clean logic of load and resistance of stress calculations that told you exactly where the danger was and exactly what it would take. The rest of life, I have found, does not come with those kinds of specifications. My wife Carol passed 4 years before I retired. Pancreatic cancer 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She went the way she did everything, without making a fuss, without asking for more than she needed. I still set 2 coffee cups out some mornings before I catch myself. Some habits do not consult your grief before they show up. I live alone now in a penthouse on the north end of Lincoln Park. 14 floors up, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the lake, a kitchen. Carol never got to use the way she always said she would. I have her photograph on the bookshelf in the study, between a worn copy of a structural engineering reference manual and the first-place ribbon our daughter Nora won at a science fair in 6th grade. I keep both because they remind me that the things worth building are never the ones you build alone. I have 3 children. Nora is 32, a civil litigation attorney in Washington, D.C. Sharp, precise, and entirely her mother's stubbornness wearing my face. Marcus is 28, a cybersecurity specialist here in Chicago, the one who calls on Sundays without being reminded and shows up with groceries when he suspects I have been too busy reading to eat properly. And then there is Dominic. Dominic is 40 years old, my firstborn, and the one who most inherited my ability to walk into a room and make everyone in it feel immediately at ease. He manages a private investment fund out of an office on Wacker Drive, or he did at the time I am telling you about. He is tall, well-dressed in that effortless way that suggests money that does not need to announce itself, and he has a smile that his mother always said could talk the frost off a January window. I believed that smile for 40 years. That is not a detail I offer lightly, and it is not one I have made peace with easily. The call came on the 21st of November, a Tuesday, at 8:17 in the morning. I was standing at the kitchen counter with my second cup of coffee working through the Tribune on my tablet when my phone buzzed against the granite. Dominic's name on the screen. Dad. His voice was warm in that easy, unhurried way he had, the voice of a man who had never once in his life felt rushed by anything. How are you feeling? You sound good. I feel fine, I said. I was reading. He laughed. Of course you were. Listen, I'm calling because Sandra and I want you to come for Christmas Eve. Dinner at the house, just family. Nothing big. I set my coffee cup down. Christmas Eve. Sandra's been talking about it since October, he said, and I could hear him smiling through the phone. She wants to do it right this year. Full dinner, the fireplace, going the whole thing. He paused for just a beat. She's planning that ribeye you like. The one with the mushroom reduction she did 2 Thanksgivings ago. You told her it was the best thing you'd eaten since Mom's pot roast. I had said that. I remembered saying it because I had meant it. And Dominic added with the tone of a man playing what he knew was his strongest card. I found a bottle of Malbec I think you're going to want to try. Single Vineyard Mendoza 2018. The guy at the wine shop on Michigan Avenue said it was one of the best he'd stocked in 3 years. I thought of you the second he said it. I felt something warm move through my chest at that. Not sentimentality exactly. More like the particular satisfaction of being known, of having someone remember the specific things that matter to you and go out of their way to find them. Who else is coming? I asked. Frank is staying with us for a while. A brief pause there, so brief I almost missed it. He's going through a rough patch since the divorce. It'll be good for him to have family around. Frank. My older brother, 68 years old, recently divorced after a marriage that had been struggling for the better part of a decade. I had spoken to him twice since the separation, brief calls that had the careful, surface-level quality of conversations between 2 people who care about each other but do not quite know how to say so. Frank had always been proud in a way that made him hard to reach when he was hurting. How is he holding up? I asked. Better, Dominic said. He's settling in. It helps to have somewhere to land. I looked out the kitchen window at the gray November lake 14 stories below. A container ship was moving north along the distant horizon, slow and deliberate, the kind of movement that only registers when you're looking for it. What time? I said. 5 o'clock. Come hungry, Dad. Sandra's been planning this for weeks. After I hung up, I finished my coffee standing at that window, watching the ship until it disappeared behind the line where the sky met the water. I thought about the Malbec. I thought about Frank sitting in Dominic's living room with that careful, proud expression he got when he didn't want anyone to see he was struggling. I thought about the fireplace and the mushroom reduction and what it meant to still have a place to go on a winter holiday. I thought about all of it, and I felt nothing but grateful. That more than anything else is what I need you to understand before I tell you what happened next. I walked into that Christmas Eve dinner with my whole heart open. I was not naive. I was not careless. I was a father who loved his son and believed with the kind of certainty that 38 years of building things had given him that the structures closest to you are the ones you can trust the most. I was wrong about that. And the distance between that Tuesday morning phone call and the moment I understood exactly how wrong I was, that distance is what this story is made of. The drive up to Winnetka took 31 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock on the dashboard of Marcus's car, not out of impatience, but out of habit. An engineer times things. You develop a sense for how long a thing should take, and when it takes longer or shorter than it should, you notice. 31 minutes from Lincoln Park to the North Shore on a Christmas Eve afternoon, with traffic thinning out as families settled in behind their own front doors. The sky was the particular shade of pewter that Chicago saves for its best winter evenings, and a light snow had started somewhere around Evanston. Not the serious kind, just enough to dust the bare oak trees along the road and make everything look like it had been printed on good paper. I had a bottle of Pinot Noir on the passenger seat. Not the Malbec Dominic had mentioned that was his contribution, and I had learned long ago not to bring a competing wine to a table where someone has already planned the pairing. The Pinot was from a small producer in the Willamette Valley that my neighbor Gerald had recommended the previous spring. It seemed like the right kind of gesture, thoughtful without being showy. Carol always said I had no instinct for gifts, but I disagreed. I had a very precise instinct. I just expressed it in a language most people did not immediately recognize. Dominic's house in Winnetka was a colonial revival. Brick-faced dark green shutters, a wide front walk lined with boxwoods trimmed into neat squares. The kind of house that communicated its owner's success without technically bragging about it. Every window on the ground floor was lit warm gold from inside, and I could see the shadow of the Christmas tree through the front parlor glass as I pulled into the driveway. A wreath on the front door. Candles in every window. Sandra had done the whole thing properly. I sat in the car for a moment, after I cut the engine, the way I sometimes do before I walk into a place I have not been in a while. Not hesitation. Just the habit of a man who prefers to arrive fully present, rather than still thinking about the drive. The front door opened before I reached the steps. "Robert." Sandra appeared in the doorway, and her face broke into a smile wide enough to reach her eyes. She was 35, dark-haired, dressed in a deep burgundy sweater that matched the ribbon on the wreath behind her. She crossed the porch in 2 quick steps and pulled me into a hug that surprised me with its warmth. "I'm so glad you made it. Come in, it's freezing out there." "Sandra." I hugged her back and meant it. "Something smells extraordinary. The ribye's been in the oven since 3. She beamed, taking my coat with practiced efficiency. "I've been nervous about it all day. Dominic keeps telling me it's perfect, but you know how he is. He'd tell me sawdust was perfect if I made it." I laughed at that. She was funny, Sandra. She had always been funny in that quick, self-deprecating way that made you feel immediately comfortable around her. I liked her. I want to be honest about that too, because it matters to what comes later. I walked into that house liking both of the people waiting inside it. Dominic was in the living room, standing near the fireplace with a glass of red wine already in his hand. He looked good. He always looked good, my son, with that easy physical confidence that some men are simply born with, and others spend their whole lives trying to approximate. He was wearing a charcoal sweater over dark trousers, and when he looked up and saw me, his face did something that I had watched it do for 40 years. It lit up. "Dad." He crossed the room with his hand already extended, and when I took it, he pulled me into a brief, firm embrace that smelled like cedar and wood smoke. "You look great, seriously. What are you doing walking to work?" "I walk along the lake," I said. "Every morning, have for 20 years. It shows." He clapped me on the shoulder and steered me toward the living room. "Come sit. Frank's been here since 4. I think he's already on his 2nd scotch." Frank was in the armchair nearest the fire, a glass of amber liquid balanced on his knee. My older brother. 68 years old, broad-shouldered in the way he had always been, but carrying something heavier than his frame, now a tiredness around the eyes, a careful quality to his posture, like a man who had recently learned to take up less space. He looked up when I walked in and he smiled, and the smile was genuine enough that it made my chest ache a little. "Bobby." He had called me that since we were boys, and he had never once asked permission to keep doing it. He set his glass on the side table, and we shook hands the way our father had taught us, firm, direct, a full second of eye contact. "You look well." "So do you," I said, and I mostly meant it. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Divorce agrees with nobody," he said. "But I'm getting there." We settled in Frank, back to his armchair, me on the sofa, Dominic still standing near the fireplace with that relaxed host's energy of a man in full command of his environment. Sandra moved in and out of the kitchen, bringing out a cheese board, then small plates of something warm and savory that turned out to be a mushroom crostini. The fire crackled. The Christmas tree lights blinked softly in the corner. Outside the parlor window, the snow was coming down a little heavier now, soft and unhurried against the dark. It was by any honest measure a beautiful evening. At some point, I would estimate around 5:30, perhaps 20 minutes into my first glass of Pinot Dominic, appeared from the kitchen doorway with the Malbec he had promised. The bottle was elegant in that minimalist way that signals serious wine, dark glass, a simple cream label, the vineyard name in small block letters. "Here we go," he said, with the quiet satisfaction of a man about to deliver on a promise. He set the bottle on the coffee table and picked up a separate glass from the sideboard, a fresh one already polished. "Let me open this properly. It needs a few minutes to breathe." He uncorked it with easy familiarity, poured a small measure to check it, then nodded with approval. Sandra appeared at his elbow at that precise moment, holding a glass of sparkling water. "Robert, would you like some water first?" she asked. "I always think you taste wine better when you're not thirsty." "Thank you, Sandra." I took the glass. Dominic turned slightly toward the sideboard to pour the Malbec, his back angled just enough that the bottle and the glass were outside my direct line of sight for a moment. When he turned back, the glass was full, the wine dark and beautiful in the firelight. "To family," he said, and his eyes were warm when he said it, and his hand was steady when he held the glass out to me. I took it. I raised it. I drank. The Malbec was exactly as good as he had promised. Deep and smooth with something dark underneath blackberry, a little leather, the kind of finish that stays with you. Frank raised his scotch. Sandra lifted her sparkling water. The fire popped behind us, and for one long, genuinely warm moment, I thought this is what the holidays are supposed to feel like. I did not know at that moment what was already moving through that glass toward me. I did not know yet. But I would. Before I reveal the chilling discovery the father made in the dark corners of that garage, please comment on the number 99 below so I know you're still here following this journey with me. Also, please note, the next part of this story includes some fictional elements added for dramatic effect and may not be entirely accurate. If you prefer not to listen further, you are welcome to turn off the video right here. The first thing I noticed was the dryness, not thirst. Exactly. I had finished 2 glasses of water with dinner and had not been wanting for anything. This was different. A dryness that seemed to arrive from somewhere inside the mouth, rather than on the surface of it, as if the moisture had simply decided to withdraw without explanation. I set my fork down quietly and reached for my water glass, and that was when I noticed the second thing. My hand felt slightly removed from the instruction I had given it. Not trembling, not uncooperative, just a fraction of a second behind. The way a familiar road feels wrong when you drive it in fog. You know every turn, but something in the knowing has gone slightly soft around the edges. I drank the water. I set the glass down. I smiled across the table at something Frank was saying about a fender bender he had witnessed on the Eden's Expressway that afternoon, and the smile came easily enough that I almost believed it myself. But underneath it, quiet and precise as a surveyor's measurement, a part of my brain had already begun to take stock. Dry mouth. Motor response slightly delayed. A faint metallic taste at the back of the throat, so faint I had nearly attributed it to the wine. A warmth in my face that did not quite match the temperature of the room. I am 74 years old. I have had vertigo. I have had a cold work its way through my system in the middle of a Chicago February and left me foggy for a week. I know the difference between a body sending a routine message and a body sending something that requires attention. This felt like the second kind. Low-grade, unhurried, but persistent in the way of things that do not intend to pass on their own. "Excuse me," I said, setting my napkin beside my plate. "I think I left my overcoat in the car. I'll be just a minute." "The garage is unlocked," Dominic said immediately. He said it without looking up from refilling Frank's glass, and there was nothing in his voice that I could point to as anything other than the casual helpfulness of a good host. "Doors off the kitchen hallway. Second hook on the left. I had Sandra hang it when you came in." I thanked him and stood carefully taking my time in the way that a man my age is permitted to take his time rising from a dinner table. The room did not move. I was grateful for that. Whatever this was, it had not progressed to the point where my body was embarrassing me in front of my family. Not yet. The garage was accessed through a short hallway off the kitchen, past a row of coat hooks and a small utility shelf stacked with Sandra's gardening supplies. I found the door, pushed it open, and stepped into the cold. The garage was a two-car space, Dominic's black SUV on the left, Sandra's gray sedan on the right, with a workbench along the back wall, and the kind of organized clutter that accumulates in the garage of a house where two busy people live. Garden tools hung on a pegboard. Cardboard boxes labeled in Sandra's handwriting were stacked neatly against one wall. A shop light mounted to the ceiling threw everything in that particular flat yellowish light that makes a garage feel like the backstage of a house, the part where things are stored that do not belong in the performance. My overcoat was on a hook near the door, exactly where Dominic had said it would be. I reached for it, and as I pulled it free, my elbow caught the edge of a canvas tote bag sitting on the shelf beside the hooks, the kind of mid-size bag that Sandra carried to the farmer's market, now slumped against the wall with its handles looped over a metal bracket. The bag tipped. I reached for it with my right hand, but that fractional delay I had noticed at the dinner table was still there, and my hand arrived slightly too late. The bag hit the concrete floor, and its contents scattered a folded grocery list, a lip balm, 2 hair ties, and a small zippered pouch that fell open when it landed, spilling several items across the garage floor. I bent down slower than I would have liked. Most of what had fallen out of the pouch was unremarkable. A pen, a folded receipt, a small blister pack of what appeared to be over-the-counter pain reliever, and then there was the other receipt. It was longer than the first, a printed pharmacy receipt, the kind that comes with detailed line items. I picked it up because it was the closest thing to me, and because I am a man who picks things up when they fall, rather than leaving them where they land. I was already standing when I registered what was printed on it. The item listed was not a common medication name. It was not something I recognized from my own medicine cabinet, or from the occasional conversations I had with my doctor about the standard maintenance prescriptions that come with being in your 70s. It was a specific compound name typed in the clean, impersonal font of a pharmacy's computer system. Scopolamine, quantity 1 unit, prescribed to no name listed, paid in full cash. I stood in that garage under the flat yellow light and looked at that word for a long moment. Then I did what any reasonable person would do when they encounter something unfamiliar that nonetheless produces an immediate and involuntary sense of wrongness. I took out my phone and searched for it. The results loaded in 3 seconds. Scopolamine controlled substance. Schedule prescription only in the United States. Used medically in very specific, closely monitored contexts, motion sickness patches in low doses, pre-surgical sedation under direct physician supervision. Known side effects when taken orally in elevated doses, particularly in elderly patients: dry mouth, delayed motor response, mild disorientation, short-term memory disruption, and in cases of repeated exposure, cognitive symptoms severe enough to be mistaken for early-stage dementia. I read the screen. Then I read it again more slowly. Dry mouth, delayed motor response. The words sat inside my chest like a structural calculation that had just produced a number I did not want to believe but could not argue with. An engineer does not get to decide that the math is wrong because he dislikes the answer. He checks his inputs, he verifies his assumptions, and then he accepts what the numbers are telling him, however much he would prefer otherwise. I looked at the receipt in my hand. I looked at the tote bag on the floor. I looked at the door to the kitchen hallway, still slightly ajar, warm light, and the sound of Frank's laughter coming through from the dining room. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. I was aware of that, the way I was aware of the cold in the garage, as a physical fact, not a feeling. I folded the receipt once, twice into a tight square, and I pressed it into the breast pocket of my overcoat. Then I crouched down, slowly gathered the rest of Sandra's belongings back into the pouch, and placed the bag back against the wall exactly as it had been. I straightened up. I put on my overcoat. I took one long, measured breath of cold garage air, the kind of breath you take when you need your body to slow down and your mind to speed up. An engineer never shows you where the crack is. Not until he's ready. Not until he knows exactly what he's dealing with and exactly what it will take to address it. You do not walk onto a bridge with a structural fault and announce the problem to everyone standing on it. You walk off the bridge. You get your people to safety. And then you go back with the right tools. I pushed open the door to the kitchen hallway. The warmth of the house came at me, along with the smell of the mushroom reduction and the sound of Christmas music playing softly from somewhere near the front of the house. I walked back to the dining room table. I sat down in my chair. I unfolded my napkin across my lap. "Find your coat," Dominic asked, glancing up with a smile. "Right where you said it would be," I said. And I reached for the water glass, and I smiled back at my son across the candlelit table, and I gave him absolutely nothing. The next 90 minutes were the longest of my professional life, and I spent 38 years signing off on load calculations for structures that held up highways. I sat back down at that table, and I ate my dinner. I finished the ribeye, which was genuinely excellent. I had a second helping of the roasted vegetables Sandra had made with rosemary and sea salt. I accepted another glass of water and declined more wine with a small wave of my hand that I hoped looked like contentment rather than strategy. Frank was telling a story about a fishing trip he and our father had taken in Minnesota sometime in the early 1980s, and I listened to it the way I had always listened to Frank's stories, with genuine attention. Occasional questions, a laugh at the right moments. The story was a good one. Under any other circumstances, I would have enjoyed it without reservation. Instead, I sat there in the warm candlelight of my son's dining room, and I watched. I watched Dominic refill Frank's glass with the easy generosity of a man who had nothing to hide. I watched Sandra carry plates back and forth to the kitchen, efficient and smiling, pausing once to squeeze Dominic's shoulder as she passed behind his chair. I watched Frank lean forward with both elbows on the table when he reached the funny part of the story, his face genuinely animated for the first time all evening. And I noticed with the cold precision of a man cataloging structural data that every single person at that table was performing comfort, not faking it necessarily. Not all of it. Frank's laughter was real. Sandra's pride in the meal was real. Even Dominic's warmth had something genuine in it, or had once a long time ago, before whatever had happened between the man he used to be and the man who had handed me that glass of wine. That was the thought I had to keep setting aside, the thought about which version of my son was sitting across from me. The thought about how long the distance was between those two versions and when the crossing had happened and whether I had missed the signs. I set it aside. I would have time for it later. Right now, I had work to do. I excused myself once more briefly to use the downstairs bathroom, a standard enough request at my age that no one registered it. And while I was alone for those 2 minutes, I composed a text message to Marcus and held it unsent in my hand, waiting. Marcus Joseph Callahan, 28 years old, my youngest. He worked for a cybersecurity firm in the West Loop, the kind of work that involved understanding how systems fail from the inside out, which I had always thought made him more like me than either of us usually acknowledged. He had driven me to Winnetka that afternoon because he had a standing, unspoken policy about his father driving alone at night in winter, a policy he had never explicitly announced but had simply begun practicing 2 years ago without explanation. I had never argued with it. He had texted me at 7:43 to let me know he was parked on the street 1 block north of the house. At 9:12, I sent my reply, "Start the car. I'm coming out in a few minutes. Don't ask questions until we're moving." I read it back once, then pressed send. Back at the table, dessert had appeared, a chocolate torte that Sandra had made from scratch, served with a small pour of port wine that I declined with a smile and a hand over my glass. The conversation had moved to the new year, to plans and possibilities, to a ski trip Dominic and Sandra were considering in February. I contributed exactly as much as a man who had thoroughly enjoyed his evening should contribute. No more, no less. At 9:27, I set my napkin on the table and said it was time for me to head home. I had walked 4 miles that morning, and my body was starting to remember it. Dominic stood immediately. Of course. He was already moving toward the front hallway, and there was something in the speed of his response that registered in me the way a slight asymmetry in a foundation registers, not alarming exactly, but present. "Let me get your coat." Sandra hugged me at the door, warm and genuine feeling. Frank shook my hand and held it for an extra beat, the way he sometimes did when he wanted to say something and had decided not to. I looked at my older brother's face in the hallway light. The tiredness around his eyes, the careful set of his jaw. And I thought about what it had cost him to sit at that table tonight, knowing what he knew. I did not let myself think that thought all the way to its conclusion. Not yet. Dominic walked me to the door himself. He had both hands in the pockets of his trousers, relaxed and unhurried. And he looked at me the way he had always looked at me when I was leaving somewhere, that particular expression of genuine reluctance that I had spent 40 years interpreting as love. Maybe it was. Maybe it had always been something more complicated than that, and I had simply chosen the simpler reading because it was easier to build on. "Dad?" He stopped me with a hand on my arm, gentle and warm. "Hold on, I almost forgot." He turned back toward the hallway console table and picked up 2 bottles that had been sitting there, I now realized, since before I arrived. They were supplement bottles, clean, simple packaging, a dark label with small white text. The kind of product that is designed to look both premium and trustworthy at the same time. "I've been meaning to give you these." He held them out with both hands, the way you present something you want to be taken seriously. "My nutritionist put me onto them a few months ago. They're for cognitive clarity, circulation, brain health, that kind of thing. She says most people our parents' age are running low on the compounds these replace." He smiled and his eyes were warm, and his voice carried exactly the right measure of casual concern. "I've been taking them every morning. Sandra, too. You just put a few drops in your water. You'd never know they were there." I looked at the bottles in his hands. I looked at my son's face. My chest felt like someone had pressed a cold hand flat against it and was simply holding it there, not pushing, just present. Because I understood now. Not everything I still needed the laboratory to confirm. It still needed Nora's legal mind to map out what came after, still needed to know the full shape of what had been built against me. But I understood enough. The bottles were the continuation of what had already been started. The next stage of a plan that had been designed to look from every angle like love. "Thank you, Dominic," I said. I took the bottles from his hands. "I'll start them tomorrow." He smiled. He hugged me. He stood in the doorway and watched me walk down the front path toward the street. And I did not look back, because looking back would have required me to show him my face. Marcus had the car running. I could see the exhaust curling up in the cold air from half a block away, a small white plume against the dark. I opened the passenger door and got in, and the warmth of the car closed around me like something I had not realized I needed. Marcus glanced over at me. He was 28, and he had his mother's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that looked different in every kind of light. He read my face for 3 seconds without saying a word. "Dad," he said carefully, "what happened?" I looked down at the 2 supplement bottles sitting in my lap. The clean packaging, the professional design, the careful, deliberate presentation of something that was meant to be trusted. For 38 years, I had built things designed to bear weight. I had calculated down to the decimal point exactly how much a structure could hold before it failed. And I had never once in all those years miscalculated so badly as to miss the thing that was going to fail from the inside. "Drive," I said. "I'll tell you everything, just drive." We did not go straight inside when we got back to the penthouse. Marcus pulled into the parking structure beneath the building, cut the engine, and we sat in the dark for a moment. The kind of sitting that happens when two people have been in motion and the stopping requires adjustment. I had talked for most of the drive back from Winnetka. Not frantically, not with the unraveling quality of a man losing his grip on something. Carefully. The way I would have walked a junior engineer through a structural anomaly here is what I observed here, is what the data suggests here, is what I do not yet know. Marcus had driven and listened without interrupting, which told me more about how seriously he was taking it than anything he could have said. When I finished, he had gripped the steering wheel with both hands and stared at the highway ahead of us for about 4 seconds. Then he had said very quietly, "Okay." That was all. Just okay. But the way he said it measured deliberate, the word doing the work of a much longer sentence I knew he understood. Now upstairs in the penthouse, I set the 2 supplement bottles on the kitchen table under the overhead light and looked at them the way you look at a load-bearing calculation that has come back wrong. Marcus stood across from me with his arms folded, his jaw tight, his eyes moving between my face and the bottles with an expression that was working hard to stay controlled and not entirely succeeding. "I need to check something," he said, and disappeared down the hallway toward the front closet. He came back 2 minutes later carrying a device about the size of a television remote, matte black with a small LED indicator on one end. I recognized it vaguely as something he had mentioned once in the context of his work, though I had not retained the specifics. "RF scanner," he said, answering the question I had not asked. "We use them to detect unauthorized wireless signals, surveillance equipment, hidden transmitters, that kind of thing." He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on my youngest child's face since he was 9 years old and had broken a window in the garage. I should have checked sooner. I found something 2 weeks ago, a signal I couldn't account for, but I thought it was interference from the building's network. I didn't follow up. His voice cracked slightly on the last 3 words. He pressed his lips together and looked away. "Marcus?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Check now." He moved through the living room, slowly holding the scanner at arm's length, watching the LED. Near the bookshelf, nothing. Near the windows, nothing. And then when he crouched down and ran the scanner along the underside of the coffee table, the LED went from green to a steady, unhurried red. He found the second one beneath the console table in the entryway, tucked up against the frame where the wood met the wall, small enough that you would never see it unless you were looking and looking in exactly the right way. Marcus set both devices carefully on the kitchen counter beside the supplement bottles. His hands were trembling. Not dramatically, just a fine, involuntary vibration that a person would only notice if they were paying close attention. I was paying close attention. I had been paying close attention to everything since the garage. "He's been listening," Marcus said. The words came out flat, like a structure settling. "Dad, he's been listening to everything you say in this apartment." I looked at the 2 small devices on my kitchen counter. I thought about every phone call I had made in this apartment over the past several weeks. Every conversation. Every ordinary exchange with neighbors, with my doctor's office, with the wine shop on Michigan Avenue. All of it recorded and transmitted to someone who was using it to build a case against me. My throat tightened. Not with fear, with something older and more structural than fear. The particular grief of a man who has just understood that the foundation he thought he was standing on was never solid to begin with. "Disable them," I said, "but keep them, both of them." Marcus nodded. He understood why, without my having to explain it, evidence has to remain intact to be useful. He disabled both devices by cutting the power, placed them inside a small Ziploc bag, and tucked them into a kitchen drawer. Then he stood at the counter with both hands flat on the surface and breathed for a moment. "We need a lawyer," he said. "We need a specific lawyer," I said. He looked up at me. I walked to the bookshelf in the study. Between the engineering reference manual and Nora's 6th grade science fair ribbon, there was a small framed photograph Nora at 22 standing outside the law school building on her graduation day, squinting into the sun with that particular expression she had always made when she was trying not to look as pleased as she was. I picked it up and looked at it for a long moment. 3 years. 3 years of letters, careful quarterly emails sent through the encrypted account Marcus had set up for both of us when the situation with Dominic had first made him uneasy 3 years ago. 3 years of a relationship maintained in the margins, quiet and persistent, like a load-bearing wall that everyone had forgotten was still doing its job. Nora was 32 years old and a civil litigation attorney in Washington, D.C. She had spent the last 3 years building a practice that specialized in exactly the kind of complex, multi-party civil disputes that required someone who could hold an enormous amount of contradictory information in their head simultaneously and find the structural weakness in the other side's case. Dominic had pushed her out of this family because she was the one person he had correctly identified as someone who would never be fooled by him. He had been right about that. He had simply failed to account for what she would do if she were ever given a reason to come back. I set the photograph down. I picked up my phone. Her number was still in my contacts under the name I had always used for her, a habit from years of keeping things simple that had taken on a different meaning somewhere along the way. I pressed call. It rang once. "Dad." Her voice was immediate and alert. No grogginess, no adjustment period. Nora had always woken up fully, like a light switching on. "It's almost 1 in the morning. What's wrong?" I looked across the study at Marcus, who was standing in the doorway, with his arms folded and his eyes red at the corners, trying to hold himself together in the careful way of a young man who does not yet know that falling apart in front of his father is allowed. "I need you to listen to me," I said to Nora. "All the way through. Don't stop me until I'm done." A beat. Then, with the quiet certainty of someone who had just shifted every gear she had into place, "Go ahead, Dad. I'm listening." I talked for 11 minutes without stopping. I know because Marcus timed it. He told me later the way he tells me things that are precise and slightly unexpected as a kind of offering. 11 minutes. The drive from Winnetka, the garage, the receipt, the Google search, the dinner. Frank's face in the hallway, light the supplement bottles, the devices under the furniture. I laid it out in sequence the way I would have presented a structural report, chronological, factual, without editorializing. I gave her the data and let her build the picture herself, because Nora had always been better at pictures than I was. When I finished, the line went quiet. Not the quiet of someone who has nothing to say. The quiet of someone processing at a speed that requires the temporary suspension of speech. I had heard that particular quality of silence from her before, once when she was 16, and I had told her that her mother's cancer had come back. She had gone quiet in exactly this way, and when she came back, she had been someone slightly different than the girl who had gone in. "Nora," I said, "I'm here." Her voice had changed. The midnight alertness was still there, but underneath it something else had shifted, a gear change so clean and complete that I felt it through the phone like a vibration in a cable under load. She was not my daughter processing a crisis anymore. She was a civil litigation attorney who had just received the opening brief of the most important case she would ever work. "Walk me through the receipt again," she said. "Exactly what it said," I told her. "Scopolamine. Quantity 1 unit. No name. Cash payment." She was quiet for 2 seconds. "And the devices Marcus found, he disabled them without destroying them. Both of them, in a sealed bag." "Good." I heard her moving bare feet on hardwood, the sound of a laptop opening. "That's good, Dad. That matters more than you know right now." She explained it to me the way she always explained legal concepts, without condescension, but without softening either. Chain of custody, she said, was the documented record of how evidence was collected, handled, and preserved from the moment of discovery to the moment it was presented in court. Break that chain, mishandle a sample, fail to document a transfer, allow contamination, and a defense attorney could argue the evidence was compromised. The judge could exclude it entirely. Everything Marcus had done tonight. The careful disabling the sealed bag. The decision not to touch the supplement bottles, all of it was already, without anyone planning it that way, the beginning of a proper evidentiary record. "You need to understand something," she said, and her voice had the particular steadiness of someone delivering information they wish they did not have to deliver. "What you're describing isn't just a crime. It's a specific kind of legal architecture. Guardianship fraud. What some attorneys call a predatory guardianship scheme is one of the most difficult things to prosecute because it's designed to look from every external angle like concern." She explained it clearly and without rushing. A guardianship petition in Illinois is a legal filing that asks the Cook County Probate Court to declare a person legally incapacitated, unable to manage their own affairs. If granted, the court appoints a guardian who takes control of that person's finances, medical decisions, and daily life. The target loses the legal right to manage their own estate. In cases involving significant assets, the appointed guardian gains access to everything. To file successfully, Nora continued, you need documented evidence of cognitive decline, medical records, behavioral observations, witness testimony. What Dominic has been building: the recorded phone call, the supplement bottles, the listening devices to monitor your behavior. That's the documentation. He's been constructing a medical record of your decline without your knowledge. Marcus made a sound from the corner of the kitchen. Not a word. Just a sound, the kind that escapes when something hits hard enough that the body responds before the mind can stop it. He was standing with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug he had made at some point, and not yet touched his jaw, working slightly, his eyes bright with something that was not going to stay contained much longer. I looked at my youngest son and felt something move through my chest that had no structural analogy. Some things do not reduce to engineering. If we go to the police tonight, I said, what happens? Dominic denies everything. The receipt was Sandra's from a legitimate prescription, easy enough to fabricate. The devices were installed by a security contractor he hired without telling you, also deniable. Without independent scientific confirmation of what's in those bottles, you have a theory and some circumstantial evidence. A beat. That's not enough. Not against a man with a lawyer already on retainer who has been preparing for exactly this moment. So we wait. We prepare, she said, and the distinction in her voice was clear and deliberate. There's a difference. Tomorrow morning, and I mean early before the holiday, foot traffic picks up. Marcus needs to ship those supplement bottles to an independent toxicology laboratory. Not the local police lab. Private, independent, with no connection to anyone in this situation. She gave me the name of a laboratory in Philadelphia that she had worked with during a civil case 2 years prior. She trusted their chain of custody procedures and their turnaround time on rush processing. Pay cash, she said. Don't use your home address as the return. Is there somewhere nearby a neighbor, a vacant property that could receive a package without raising questions? I thought of the building 2 doors down on Orchard Street that had been sitting empty since September, a foreclosure that the bank had not yet listed. Yes, I said. Use that. Another pause. And Dad, don't touch those bottles with your bare hands from this point forward. Bag them before Marcus handles them for shipping. I looked at the 2 supplement bottles still sitting on the kitchen table under the overhead light. Clean packaging. Simple design. The careful professional presentation of something that was meant to be trusted. Nora. I stopped. Somewhere in the architecture of what I needed to say, I could not find the load-bearing piece. I should have. Not now. Her voice was gentle but certain, the way a wall is gentle and certain. We are going to have that conversation, Dad. I promise you we will, but not tonight. A breath. Get some sleep. Tell Marcus to get some sleep. I'll call you at 7. She called at 6:43. December 26th, 2023. Lincoln Park, Chicago, 6:43 a.m. The phone rang at 6:43 in the morning, just like she said it would. I had not slept. I had been sitting in the armchair by the window with a legal pad on my knee, writing down everything I remembered from the night before, in the order it happened. Times, words, the exact color of the label on the supplement bottles, the way Sandra had turned her back to the sideboard before handing me that glass. An engineer does not rely on memory alone. He writes things down. He creates a record. Nora's voice came through clearly. She sounded as though she had not slept either, but she was sharp the way she always gets when a problem has been reduced to a sequence of solvable steps. Good morning, Dad. Are the bottles still in the bag Marcus brought in? Still sealed. I haven't touched them again. Good. Use latex gloves when you handle them. Kitchen gloves will work if that's all you have. Do not let your skin make contact with the caps or the labels. Fingerprints on the surface matter. She paused for a moment. I need you to write down this address. I pressed the pen to the legal pad. She gave me a street address in Philadelphia, a receiving suite at a private toxicology laboratory she had worked with before on a civil case. She explained that she had already made a call the previous evening after we had spoken, and that the lab was expecting a priority delivery. They would process the samples under a client reference number she provided, not under any of our names. This keeps you at a distance from the chain of custody, she said. If this ever goes to court, the samples need to come in clean. I did not ask her to slow down. I wrote every word. Marcus was still there, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee untouched in front of him. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his jaw was tight. He had barely spoken since we got home, and I recognized that silence. It was the silence of a person trying to process something that does not fit into any category they have prepared for. I set the legal pad on the table in front of him and tapped the address with one finger. We need to send this before noon, I said. FedEx priority overnight, cash only. He looked up at me. I know a FedEx office that opens at 8 on the 26th. It's on North Clark, about 6 blocks from here. Good. Do you want me to go alone? I thought about that for a moment. The listening devices were disabled and sealed in plastic bags in my desk drawer. But I had no way of knowing whether Dominic had other means of monitoring my movements. A car parked outside. Someone watching the building entrance. No, I said. We go together, but we don't leave from the front. He nodded slowly, and I could see something shift in him. Not comfort exactly. More like the recognition that his father had a plan and that the plan was already in motion. There was one more thing I needed. I could not use the penthouse address as the return sender. If anyone intercepted the package label, or if Dominic had a contact inside the building using my own address, would expose everything before the samples ever reached Philadelphia. That was when I thought of Jeff Malone. Jeff had lived in this unit directly below mine for 11 years. We had eaten Thanksgiving dinners together on 3 separate occasions after his wife passed. He was 62, retired from the city planning department, and he had the particular quality that I have always valued most in a person: he did not ask unnecessary questions. I called him at 7:15. Jeff, it's Robert. Morning. Everything all right? I need a small favor. I need to use your unit number as a return address on a package I'm sending today. Personal matter. I'll explain when I can. There was a brief pause. I heard him set something down on his kitchen counter. Unit 412, he said. You've got it. That was all. No questions. No conditions. 11 years of quiet trust reduced to 4 words and a unit number, and I felt something tighten in my chest that I had not expected to feel right then. Marcus prepared the package at the kitchen table using the latex gloves from under my sink. He placed both supplement bottles inside a sealed plastic evidence bag, labeled the bag with the client reference number Nora had given us, wrapped it in a second layer of bubble wrap, and placed it aside a plain brown shipping box. I stood beside him and watched his hands work. They were steady. I was proud of that, even if I did not say so. We left through the service corridor at 7:55, walked 6 blocks north, on a street that was still quiet from the holiday, and reached the FedEx office on North Clark at 8:03. Marcus paid in cash. The clerk printed the label. The package went into the outbound bin at 8:07. I watched it disappear behind the counter, and I did not feel relief. I felt the way I always felt in the middle of a structural review, when the foundation has been measured and the report has been sent, but the numbers are still being analyzed somewhere you cannot see. You have done what you can do. Now you wait. And waiting, I have always found, is the hardest kind of work. January 3rd, 2024, Lincoln Park, Chicago, 11:20 a.m. The 8 days between sending that package and seeing my daughter walk through my front door were the longest 8 days I had spent in a very long time. I kept my routine. I made coffee at 6:30 every morning. I read the Tribune. I called Marcus once a day, always from the burner phone he had bought at a Walgreens on December 26th, paying cash, the same afternoon we sent the package. We spoke in short sentences and said nothing about the lab. We talked about the weather. We talked about the bears. We talked about anything that would sound like two men with nothing to hide if someone happened to be listening from a direction we had not anticipated. I went to bed at 10 and stared at the ceiling until well past midnight each night. On the 28th, Dominic called to wish me a happy new year early. His voice was warm and unhurried. He asked how I was feeling. He asked whether the supplements had been helpful. I told him I had been taking them every morning, just as Sandra had suggested, and that I felt steadier than I had in months. I kept my voice even and grateful. I set the phone down afterward and sat very still in the kitchen for a long time. Marcus came by on the 30th. He sat across from me at the table, and we reviewed everything we had documented so far, the receipt photograph, the disabled listening devices sealed in bags in my desk drawer, the FedEx tracking confirmation showing the package had been received in Philadelphia on December 27th at 9:51 in the morning. He had printed the tracking page and tucked it inside a plain manila folder. Nora confirmed the lab received it, he said. She said they flagged it for priority processing. How long? She said to expect results around the 7th or 8th. I nodded and looked out the window at the gray lake in the distance. 8 days of waiting had already taught me something I thought I already knew, that discipline is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act correctly despite it. Nora landed at O'Hare on the 3rd of January at 10:45 in the morning. She had texted Marcus from the gate. He picked her up and drove her directly to the penthouse, and I heard her key turn in the lock I had given her a copy years ago during a period when I was traveling for work and needed someone to check on the place at 11:23. She was 32 years old, and she had her mother's posture. That was the first thing I noticed every time I saw her. Straight spine, chin level, the kind of bearing that does not ask permission to enter a room. She was wearing a charcoal wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had been through more than a few courtrooms. Her dark hair was pulled back. She looked tired in the way that lawyers look tired, not from lack of sleep exactly, but from carrying too many other people's problems for too many consecutive hours. She crossed the room and hugged me without saying anything first. I felt her hold on a moment longer than usual. "Dad," she said quietly. "I'm all right," I told her. She pulled back and looked at me directly the way she always had, the way that made me think she was running her own structural assessment, checking the load-bearing points, looking for stress fractures. "I know you are," she said, "but I needed to see that for myself." Marcus set her briefcase down near the table and put the kettle on. The three of us sat together for the first time in almost 2 years, and for a few minutes we did not talk about any of it. Nora asked about the building. I asked about her caseload. Marcus told a short story about a client who had accidentally locked himself out of his own encrypted server and had to call Marcus at 2 in the morning to solve a problem that turned out to be a forgotten capital letter in a password. Nora laughed. It was a real laugh, short and sudden, and it broke something loose in the room that I had not realized was held tight. Then she opened the briefcase. She laid 3 documents on the table, in a precise row, the way she had always organized things since she was a child, doing homework at this same table, in a different apartment, in a different decade, when her mother was still alive. "The lab results come back in 4 to 5 days, she said. "When they do, we are going to need to move quickly. So before that happens, I need you to walk me through everything, every detail, from the beginning." She uncapped a pen and set it against a yellow legal pad. "Start with the phone call," she said. I looked at my daughter sitting across from me in the January light coming through the window over Lake Michigan, and I felt something I had not felt since the night Marcus had walked me out of Winnetka through the cold. I felt like we had a foundation again. January 8th, 2024. Lincoln Park, Chicago 10:12 a.m. The call came in at 10:12 on a Monday morning. Nora had been staying in the guest room since the 3rd. She had spent the intervening days working from my dining room table, her laptop open beside a growing stack of legal pads covered in her small, precise handwriting. She had reviewed everything I gave her: the photograph of the receipt from Sandra's bag, the FedEx tracking record, the documentation Marcus had compiled on the listening devices, and she had organized it all into a sequence that she said would hold up under cross-examination. She had also spent several hours on the phone with colleagues in Chicago, building a picture of Douglas Crane, the attorney whose name had appeared in the guardianship documents Marcus had found referenced in a financial disclosure Dominic had filed the previous October. I had given her everything I had. And then we waited. Marcus arrived at 9:45 that morning. He brought coffee from the place on Armitage that I had been going to for 12 years, 3 cups in a carrier, no conversation needed. We sat around the table and Nora read through her notes one more time while Marcus and I watched the lake. The phone rang at 10:12. It was the lab in Philadelphia. Nora took the call standing up. I watched her face. She had her back half turned to me, which I understood she did not want me reading her expression before she had processed the information herself. But I could see the line of her shoulders, and I could see the exact moment the number was given to her because her pen stopped moving. She said thank you. She said she would follow up by email regarding the chain of custody documentation. She ended the call and stood with the phone in her hand for a moment before she turned around. Marcus was leaning forward with both elbows on the table. I had not moved. 8 times, Nora said. Her voice was steady but quieter than usual. The scopolamine concentration in both bottles was 8 times the established safety threshold for an adult male of your age and weight. The room was very still. I had been an engineer for 38 years. I had worked with tolerances and safety margins my entire professional life. A load-bearing structure is designed with a safety factor built in. A bridge rated for 40 tons is built to hold 60 because the world does not always behave predictably, and the consequences of failure are not recoverable. 8 times the threshold did not mean someone had made a careless mistake with a dosage. 8 times meant the outcome had been calculated. 8 times meant whoever had prepared those bottles had known exactly what they were doing and had not been concerned about the margin. Marcus pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window and put one hand on the glass and stared out at the street below without speaking. Nora set the phone down and looked at me directly. "Dad," she said, "I need you to hear what I'm about to say very clearly. I'm listening. This result changes the legal category of what we're dealing with. This is no longer a civil matter. At this concentration, and with this documentation, what was done to you meets the threshold for criminal elder abuse under Illinois statute. It also potentially triggers federal jurisdiction, depending on how the guardianship filing was structured, and whether any financial instruments crossed state lines. I nodded slowly. I had understood this was possible from the moment I photographed that receipt in the garage. But hearing it stated in legal terms with a number attached made it concrete in a way that photographs and suspicions had not. "What does that mean for how we proceed?" I asked. "It means we do not file anything yet," she said. "It means we build the complete case first, every layer, before we give anyone the opportunity to respond or destroy evidence. We need a competency evaluation from an independent neurologist, not to prove you're incapacitated, but to prove you are not, and to do it on the record before Dominic files his petition." She picked up her pen again. "And we need to talk to Detective Boyd." Marcus turned away from the window. "You're sure about that?" "The Illinois State Police Elder Abuse Unit handles cases of this severity," Nora said. "Ryan Boyd was referred to me by a colleague in the Cook County DA's office. He has worked financial exploitation cases before. He knows how to build something that sticks." She wrote the name at the top of a clean page on the legal pad and underlined it once. "We have the number," she said. "Now we build the case around it." I looked at the legal pad at the single name written in her careful hand, and I thought about something I used to tell junior engineers when they found a fault in a structure that had already been signed off and approved. I told them that the hardest part is never finding the problem. The hardest part is deciding how far you are willing to go to fix it. I already knew my answer to that question. I had known it since the night I stood in that garage holding a receipt under a fluorescent light, while my son was inside refilling wine glasses and laughing at his own joke. January 9th, 2024, West Loop, Chicago, 2:15 p.m. Nora made the call to Ryan Boyd at 8:40 the following morning. I did not listen to the conversation. I sat in the kitchen with my second cup of coffee and watched the frost on the window above the sink catch the early light, and I let her work. That was something I had learned about my daughter over the years. She did not need an audience when she was building something. She needed space and silence and the confidence that no one was going to interrupt her momentum. She came into the kitchen 22 minutes later and refilled her coffee without sitting down. "He wants to meet today," she said. 2:15. "There is a place in the West Loop he uses for preliminary conversations. A quiet restaurant closed for lunch service by that hour. His contact in the Cook County DA's office vouched for us, so he already has some context." "All three of us?" Marcus asked from across the table. "You and Dad, yes. He asked that we bring the physical evidence, everything documented and in the original bags." We drove to the West Loop in Marcus's car. The restaurant was on Randolph Street, a narrow Italian place with dark wood paneling and white tablecloths that had been cleared and reset for the evening. A hostess led us through the empty dining room to a corner table near the back, away from the windows. Ryan Boyd was already there. He was 48 years old, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had spent considerable time outdoors in difficult weather. His hair was silver at the temples and cut close. He was wearing a charcoal sport coat over a plain white shirt with no tie, and he had a notepad and a pen laid out on the table in front of him, the way Nora always did, which I noticed immediately and found quietly reassuring. He stood when we approached and shook hands with each of us in turn, firm grip, direct eye contact, no excess ceremony. "Mr. Callahan," he said to me, "I appreciate you coming in. Thank you for making time," I said. We sat down. Boyd poured water from the carafe on the table and waited until we were settled before he opened his notepad. "I've been with the Elder Abuse Unit at Illinois State Police for 9 years, he said. "Before that, 6 years working financial crimes out of the Springfield field office. I've seen most variations of what you're describing. Forced guardianship schemes tied to estate liquidation are more common than people want to believe, and they are significantly more difficult to prosecute than a straightforward fraud case because the legal mechanisms involved are designed to look protective from the outside." He set his pen flat against the notepad. "That's what makes the physical evidence you have so important. Most families in your situation don't find the receipt. They don't find the devices. By the time they realize what's happened, the guardianship order is already signed, and the assets are already moving. He said it matter-of-factly without drama, and I respected that. Nora opened her briefcase and laid the documented evidence on the table in precise order. The sealed bags containing the listening devices, the photograph of the receipt printed on plain paper with the metadata preserved, the FedEx chain of custody record, the lab report from Philadelphia, which had arrived by encrypted email that morning, 12 pages, including the toxicological breakdown and the certifying signatures from 2 independent analysts. Boyd reviewed each item without touching anything he did not need to touch. He read the lab report, slowly turning pages with the corner of his pen. When he reached the summary page with the concentration figures, he stopped and looked up at me. 8 times the threshold, he said. Yes. He held my gaze for a moment, then looked back down at the page. That's not an accident, and it's not negligence. At that concentration in a man your age and weight, sustained exposure over several weeks would produce documented cognitive symptoms consistent with early dementia. Confusion, short-term memory loss, impaired judgment. Exactly the profile a guardianship petition needs to succeed. Marcus had gone very still beside me. I could feel the tension in him without looking. What do we need to build a case that holds? Nora asked. Boyd set the lab report down and picked up his pen. 3 things, he said. First, an independent cognitive assessment from a board-certified neurologist conducted under controlled conditions with full documentation. That establishes a clean baseline that contradicts any claim of incapacity. Second, financial records showing the connection between the guardianship filing and any debt or financial pressure on Dominic Callahan's side. Motive is not required for prosecution, but it makes a jury understand the story. He tapped the pen once against the notepad. Third, we need him to come to you. We need him to make a move with witnesses and documentation present. Right now, he does not know what you have. That is the most valuable thing you possess, and we cannot afford to spend it early. The room was quiet for a moment. How long do we have before he files the guardianship petition? I asked. Boyd considered the question. Based on what you've described, my estimate is 2 to 3 weeks. He's been building toward this for months. The holidays slowed everything down. He'll want to move in January while the paperwork is still fresh. I looked at Nora. She was already writing. 2 to 3 weeks. I had spent 38 years calculating how much load a structure could bear before the foundation gave way. I knew exactly what 2 to 3 weeks meant when someone was already applying pressure to the joints. It meant we did not have time to be careful. We only had time to be precise. January 10th, 2024, Streeterville, Chicago, 9 a.m. Nora had scheduled the appointment before we left the restaurant on Randolph Street. She had made the call from the parking structure on our way to Marcus's car, standing in the cold, between 2 concrete pillars, with her phone pressed to her ear and her breath coming out in short white clouds. By the time we reached the street level, she had a confirmed time and an address in Streeterville. That was how Nora worked. She did not wait for the right moment. She created it. Dr. Marcus Sterling's office was on the 14th floor of a medical building 2 blocks east of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The waiting room was spare and clean, with gray upholstered chairs and a window that looked north toward the lake. There were no magazines on the table. There was no television on the wall. It was the kind of room that communicated without saying anything, that the work done here required quiet. Dr. Sterling came out to greet us himself. He was 65 years old, with a lean build and close-cropped white hair that had the look of a man who had stopped paying attention to his appearance sometime in his 50s and found the result perfectly satisfactory. He wore a white coat over a dark blue shirt and moved with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had learned over a long career that speed and accuracy are not the same thing. His handshake was firm and brief. "Mr. Callahan," he said. I've reviewed the referral notes your daughter sent over this morning. I want you to know that everything discussed in this room today is protected under physician-patient confidentiality, and that my assessment will be conducted without reference to any legal proceedings currently underway. My job is to evaluate what I find documented accurately and report it without modification. Nothing more. That's exactly what I need, I said. Nora and Marcus waited in the chairs by the window. Sterling led me into an examination room at the end of the corridor and closed the door. The assessment took 2 hours and 17 minutes. I had expected something clinical and cold. A series of questions read from a checklist, a few memory exercises, a signature at the bottom of a page. What Sterling conducted was considerably more thorough than that. He began with a standard cognitive screening, asking me to repeat sequences of words, identify patterns in a series of shapes, recall a short paragraph after a 10-minute interval. Then he moved into more complex territory: abstract reasoning, spatial processing, verbal fluency under mild time pressure. He asked me about my engineering career not as small talk, but as a structured assessment of long-term memory and professional recall. He asked me to describe the load distribution process for a cable-stayed bridge from first principles, and he listened for 20 minutes without interrupting while I walked him through the math. At one point, he set down his pen and looked at me with an expression that I could not immediately categorize. "How long did you say you've been retired?" he asked. 4 years. He nodded slowly and made a note. "The level of technical retention you're demonstrating is consistent with someone who is actively practicing, not someone 4 years removed from daily application. That is not a common finding in a man of 74. I did not respond to that. I understood what he was doing. He was noting it for the record, not offering a compliment. He concluded the session with a standardized neurological examination, testing reflex, response, balance, fine motor coordination, and eye tracking. He took blood pressure readings at 3 intervals. He asked about my sleep patterns, my diet, my daily routine. He asked whether I had experienced any recent episodes of confusion, disorientation, or unexpected emotional instability. I told him about Christmas Eve. I told him about the dry mouth and the slight motor delay I had felt at the dinner table. I told him I had attributed it to the wine at the time and that I now understood what it had actually been. He wrote for a long time after I finished speaking. When he walked me back to the waiting room, Nora stood up immediately. Sterling addressed her directly, which I appreciated. He did not speak around me as though I were not present. "I will have the full written report finalized within 48 hours, he said. "What I can tell you now is that Mr. Callahan's cognitive performance today falls within the range I would expect from a healthy, high-functioning individual approximately 15 years his junior. His memory, reasoning, and processing speed all exceed the normative benchmarks for his age group by a significant margin." He paused. "There is no clinical basis from anything observed today for a finding of cognitive incapacity." Nora held his gaze. "And that will be in the written report." "Every word of it," Sterling said. She exhaled once quietly through her nose. Marcus put his hand briefly on my shoulder and then dropped it without saying anything. I looked out the window at the gray January lake 14 floors below, and I thought about load ratings and safety margins and the difference between what a structure appears to be and what it actually is. Dominic had spent months building a case that his father was failing. He had spent months building it on the wrong foundation. 11th of January, 2024, Lincoln Park, Chicago, 8:30 a.m. Sterling's written report arrived by encrypted email at 7:51 the following morning. Nora printed 2 copies at the desk in the guest room and brought them to the kitchen table before I had finished my first cup of coffee. She set one in front of me without comment and kept the other for herself. We read in silence while Marcus stood at the counter eating a piece of toast and watching us the way he always watched things quietly from a slight distance, taking in information before deciding what to do with it. The report was 11 pages. The language was precise and technical, in the way that court documents always are built to withstand challenge rather than to communicate warmth. But the conclusion was unambiguous. Dr. Marcus Sterling, board-certified neurologist, 22 years of independent forensic evaluation for Illinois courts, found no clinical evidence of cognitive impairment, incapacity, or diminished decision-making ability in Robert James Callahan, age 74, assessed January 10, 2024. I read that sentence 3 times, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. 38 years of building things that held, and here was the document that said I was still the man who built them. Nora forwarded the report to Boyd at 8:02. He called back at 8:29. "Good result?" he said. His voice came through the speaker on the kitchen table, flat and businesslike. Sterling's reputation in Cook County Probate Court is solid. Any judge who sees his name on a document is going to take the findings seriously. A pause. "I need to talk to you about what we found on our end." Nora leaned forward. "Go ahead." "My office pulled public financial records on Dominic Callahan yesterday afternoon. Corporate filings, public court records, property registration. Nothing that required a subpoena." Another pause, shorter this time. "He has a problem." Marcus set down his toast. "His fund reported a 31% loss in the third quarter of 2023, Boyd said. "That's not unusual by itself, but when you cross-reference it with the property records, you find that he refinanced the Winnetka house in August of last year at a rate that only makes sense if he needed liquidity fast. There's also a civil judgment filed in Cook County in September, a creditor action for $840,000. It was settled out of court in October, but the timing matters." I set my coffee cup down carefully. "September," I said. "Yes," Boyd said. "Which is also when our records show Douglas Crane first registered a new case file under a client designation matching Dominic Callahan's tax identification number. We can't access the file contents without a subpoena, but the registration date is public record." The room was very quiet. I thought about September. I thought about the call Dominic had made in late September, inviting me to a Cubs game, just the two of us, the way we used to go when he was a boy. We had sat in the upper deck on a Tuesday afternoon, and he had bought me a hot dog and asked very casually whether I had updated my estate documents recently. I had told him I was comfortable with the existing arrangements. He had nodded and changed the subject, and I had forgotten about it by the time we reached the parking structure. I had not forgotten about it now. "So the timeline runs September to December," Nora said. "Financial collapse in the third quarter, civil judgment in September, Crane engagement in September, Christmas Eve in December. That's how it reads," Boyd said. "The guardianship petition is the mechanism. Your father's estate is the solution to a debt problem." Marcus had moved to the table and was sitting with both hands flat on the surface, staring at the wall. I recognized that posture. He was doing what engineers and programmers both do when they encounter a system failure, tracing the sequence backward to the point where the design went wrong. "What do we need to build the financial motive formally into the case?" Nora asked. "Grand jury subpoena for Crane's client records and Dominic's fund accounts," Boyd said. "I'm filing the application to the Cook County Circuit Court today. Given what we have, the lab report, the devices, Sterling's assessment, I expect the subpoena approved within 10 days. That puts us at around the 21st, Nora said, "give or take. Which means we need the trap set before then, because if Dominic gets wind of any legal activity touching his financial records, he will move the petition filing forward, and we lose the window." Nora looked at me across the table. I looked back at her. 44 years ago, I had held her for the first time in a hospital room on the north side of this city, and she had weighed 6 pounds and 11 ounces, and I had thought that nothing in my life would ever require more precision than that moment. I had been wrong about a number of things in my life. This was not one of them. "We set the trap on the 18th, she said. 7 days from today." "Agreed," Boyd said. I picked up my coffee cup again. It had gone cold while we were talking, but I drank it anyway. 7 days. I had built bridges that took 4 years to complete. 7 days felt like nothing and everything at the same time. 12th of January, 2024, Lincoln Park, Chicago morning. The week moved. The way the week before at a major construction deadline always moves, with the appearance of ordinary time passing at an ordinary pace while everything underneath accelerates toward a fixed point that cannot be adjusted. Nora worked from the dining room table from 7 in the morning until well past 10 at night. She had converted one end of the table into something that resembled a small law office, stacked folders, color-coded legal pads. A second laptop she had arranged to receive encrypted communications from Boyd's office. She was building what she called the predicate package, the complete documented foundation that would support every legal action taken on and after January 18th. She explained it to me once in terms I found clarifying. A predicate package, she said, is what you bring to a judge when you need them to understand not just what happened, but why every step taken before this moment was the only reasonable step available. I understood that kind of thinking. It was the same logic I had applied when submitting structural assessments for review. You do not give a review board your conclusion. You give them the sequence that makes your conclusion inevitable. Marcus came every morning at 8 and stayed until early afternoon. He had set up a secure communication channel between the three of us using an application he trusted, and he had also begun the technical work Boyd had requested, a forensic analysis of the metadata extracted from the 2 disabled listening devices. The devices themselves remained in sealed evidence bags untouched, but the data Marcus had preserved from them before disabling told a detailed story about when they had been activated, how long they had been transmitting, and the frequency signature of the receiver they had been paired with. On the 13th, Marcus sat across from me at the kitchen table with a printed page of technical data and pointed to a column of timestamps. "The forensic logs confirm it," he said. The first device went active on November 9th, 2023, and the second on November 15th. Both were transmitting to the same receiver address before we cut the power on Christmas Eve. The signal was being routed through a commercial relay, which means someone was paying for a subscription service to monitor the feed remotely. I looked at the timestamps. November 9th. 2 weeks before Dominic had called to invite me to Christmas Eve dinner. "He was already listening before he made the call," I said. "Yes," Marcus said. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Boyd called on the 14th with an update. The grand jury application had been submitted to the Cook County Circuit Court. He had also secured a court-authorized recording order from a Cook County judge, which meant that any conversation Robert participated in from this point forward could be legally recorded with his consent alone without notifying the other party. He read the relevant statutory language over the phone so that Nora could confirm the scope and add it to the predicate package. The days settled into a rhythm that was almost calm on the surface. I cooked in the evenings. I read in the armchair by the window. I called Jeff Malone twice, once to thank him, and once simply to talk, because there are moments when a man needs the company of someone who does not know the details of what he is carrying. Dominic called on the 15th. I was in the kitchen when the phone rang, and I looked at the screen for 2 full seconds before I answered. Marcus was at the table behind me. I did not look at him. I picked up the phone and made my voice exactly what it had been every time my son had called me for the past 40 years. "Hey Dom, Dad, how are you feeling? You sound good." "Feeling fine. Getting some reading done. You know how January is." "I do." A brief pause that I recognize now as the pause of someone monitoring rather than thinking. "Sandra and I were talking. We thought maybe we'd come into the city next week, take you to dinner. Nothing fancy. Just the 3 of us." I kept my breathing even. "I'd like that," I said. "What day were you thinking?" "Thursday, the 18th. I closed my eyes for 1 second. 1 second, no more. "Thursday works fine," I said. "Should I make a reservation somewhere, or did you have a place in mind?" "Let Sandra pick. She's better at that than I am." He laughed, and the laugh was warm and familiar, and completely indistinguishable from every laugh I had heard from him since he was a boy. "We'll confirm by Wednesday." "Sounds good. Give Sandra my best." I set the phone down on the counter and stood very still, with both hands flat on the granite surface, and looked at the wall in front of me until I was certain my face was under control. Then I turned around. Marcus was already looking at me. "Thursday the 18th, I said. He nodded once slowly. Then he picked up his phone and sent a single message to Nora and Boyd. He did not need to type anything elaborate. 3 words were sufficient. He chose the date, January 18th, 2024. Lincoln Park, Chicago, 7:15 a.m. I woke at 6 that morning without an alarm. That had been happening for most of my adult life. 38 years of project deadlines and early morning site visits had trained my body to understand that certain days require you before they announce themselves. I lay still for a few minutes in the gray pre-dawn light coming through the bedroom curtains and listened to the buildings settle around me the way old buildings do. In January, the slow contraction of steel and concrete responding to cold, the same way everything responds to pressure by adjusting, by finding a new equilibrium, by holding. I got up at 6:15. I showered and dressed carefully. Not differently than usual, a dark wool sweater, gray trousers, the kind of clothes a 74-year-old man wears on a Thursday when his son is coming for dinner. Nothing that would signal preparation. Nothing that would read as anything other than an ordinary evening getting underway. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the lake. Nora arrived at 7:15 carrying her briefcase and a paper bag from the bakery on Armitage. She set the bag on the counter without comment. 2 almond croissants and a container of orange juice, and opened her briefcase on the dining room table. She had been staying at a hotel 2 blocks away for the past 3 nights, which had been Boyd's suggestion. If Dominic had any remaining surveillance on the building, a pattern of overnight guests would raise questions. The hotel kept her close without creating a visible presence. She looked at me when she came in a quick assessment, the same one she had been running since she was a child, whenever she sensed I was carrying something I had not spoken about. "How did you sleep?" she asked. "Well enough," I said. It was mostly true. Marcus arrived at 7:40. He had the RF scanner in a backpack along with 2 recording devices, small flat units no larger than a deck of cards, both operating under the court-authorized order Boyd had secured on the 14th. He did a sweep of the penthouse in 11 minutes, moving through each room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this before, which by this point he had. He came back to the kitchen and set the scanner on the counter. "Clean," he said. "Nothing new." Boyd arrived at 8:05 with 2 officers from the Illinois State Police Elder Abuse Unit. I had not met the officers before. Their names were Reyes and Callaway, both in plain clothes, both carrying the particular stillness of people trained to wait in small spaces for extended periods without drawing attention to themselves. Boyd introduced them briefly, explained their positions, Reyes in the service corridor, Callaway in the stairwell, 1 floor below, and confirmed the arrest warrants were signed and ready. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and laid a single sheet of paper between us. "This is the sequence," he said. "Dominic and Sandra arrive. You let them in normally. You sit in the living room. At some point tonight, Dominic will introduce the subject of your health, your estate, or both. He may produce documents. He may ask you to sign something. Whatever he resents, you do not sign. You say you want to review it with your attorney first." "And when he pushes," I asked. "He will push," Boyd said. "When he does, you say the same thing again. At the point where it becomes clear that a legal instrument is being presented under false pretenses to a senior citizen, I come in." He folded the paper. Simple sequence. Nothing improvised. Nora placed 1 recording device under the lip of the coffee table in the living room, and the second on the bookshelf beside the window, angled toward the seating area. She tested both with Marcus-confirmed audio clarity and noted the timestamps in the predicate package. By 9:30, everything was in position. Reyes had taken the service corridor. Calloway was in the stairwell. Boyd was in the guest bedroom with the door slightly ajar, close enough to hear a raised voice, far enough to remain invisible. Marcus sat at the dining room table with his laptop open, monitoring the audio feeds in real time. Nora sat beside him, her legal pad open, her pen in her hand. I sat in the armchair by the window that looked out over Lincoln Park and the gray January lake beyond it, and I waited. Dominic had confirmed the previous evening by text. 7 o'clock. Sandra was making a reservation at the Italian place on Wells Street, he said. He was looking forward to seeing me. I had replied with 3 words, "Me too, son." I had meant both things at once, and only one of us knew that. The lake was flat and colorless in the winter light. I thought about the bridges I had built. I thought about Carol, gone 4 years now, who had always said that the most dangerous moment in any structure is not when it is being tested, but when everyone assumes it is safe. I thought about a boy who had once sat in the upper deck at Wrigley Field, eating a hot dog next to his father, and asked about estate documents with a casual voice that his father had not thought to question. I thought about how long a man can look at something without seeing it. At 6:58, the intercom buzzed. January 18th, 2024, Lincoln Park, Chicago, 6:58 p.m. I pressed the intercom button and said, "Come up," without inflection, the way I had said it 10,000 times before, to delivery drivers and neighbors and my own children arriving for Sunday dinners, in the years when Sunday dinners were still something we did together. I heard the elevator engage in the corridor. I sat back down in the armchair and put both hands on the armrests, and reminded myself of something I had told a junior engineer once, a young woman 2 years out of graduate school, who had frozen on a job site the first time a client pushed back hard on her assessment. I had told her that the structure does not change because someone raises their voice. The numbers are the numbers. The load is the load. Your job is to hold the line. The knock came at 7:01. I opened the door. Dominic was 40 years old, and he had my height and his mother's eyes, and for a moment, standing in the doorway with the corridor light behind him, he looked so much like the boy I had taken to baseball games and science fairs and college orientation that something moved through my chest that I had not fully prepared for. Sandra stood beside him in a camel coat, with her dark hair pulled back, holding a bottle of wine in both hands, and smiling the smile she always produced for arrivals and departures. "Dad." Dominic stepped forward and embraced me, and I let him, and I put one hand briefly on his back the way fathers do. "Come in," I said. "It's cold." They came in. Sandra handed me the wine, a Napa Cabernet, which I set on the kitchen counter without opening. Dominic shrugged off his coat and looked around the penthouse the way he always did when he arrived, a quick scan that I had never thought to question before, and now understood completely. He was checking. He was always checking. We sat in the living room. I had arranged 3 chairs around the coffee table, the armchair I had been sitting in, and 2 chairs from the dining room brought over earlier, which I had placed at a natural, conversational distance. The recording device was 3 feet from where Dominic sat beneath the lip of the coffee table, silent and invisible. We talked for 40 minutes. Sandra asked about my health, with the particular warmth of someone who has practiced the question. Dominic told me about a conference he had attended in New York the previous week, a story that was detailed and fluid and entirely plausible, and I listened to it the way I had been listening to everything for the past 25 days, with the part of my mind that was tracking content and the part that was tracking everything underneath it. At 7:42, Dominic leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "Dad," he said, "there's something Sandra and I have been wanting to talk to you about for a while. We've been putting it off because we didn't want it to feel like pressure, but I think it's important." "Go ahead," I said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. He set it on the coffee table between us and smoothed it flat with both hands. "This is something Douglas Crane put together," he said. "He's an estate attorney very well regarded in Cook County. It's a limited power of attorney arrangement, nothing dramatic, just a protective measure that gives Sandra and me some legal standing to assist with financial decisions if your health ever requires it. He kept his voice careful and measured. It's not about now. It's about being prepared. I looked at the document without touching it. It was a guardianship petition. 12 pages dense with legal language with a signature line at the bottom of the final page, already marked with a small adhesive arrow. The way real estate documents are marked when a buyer is expected to sign without reading. I'd like to have my attorney review this before I sign anything, I said. Dominic's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Dad, it's not that kind of document. It's straightforward estate planning. Crane has done these for dozens of families. I understand that, I said. I'd still like my attorney to look at it. Sandra leaned forward. Robert, we're just trying to make sure you're protected. That's all this is. I know, I said, and I appreciate that. My attorney will review it by end of week. A silence settled over the room that had a different quality than the silences before it. Dominic picked up this document and held it for a moment, and I watched his face move through a calculation that I recognized from the way people look when they realize the variable they had assumed was fixed has shifted. He set the document back on the table. Dad, he said, and his voice had changed just slightly, the warmth thinning at the edges, the way ice thins at the shore in early spring. I need you to understand that this is in your best interest. There are professionals who have reviewed your situation and have concerns. This document is the appropriate response to those concerns. Which professionals? I asked. He did not answer immediately. The guest bedroom door opened. Boyd walked out first, steady and unhurried, his badge visible on his belt. Reyes came in from the service corridor. Callaway entered from the stairwell. All three moved into the living room with the quiet authority of people who have done this before and have no interest in theater. Dominic stood up. Ryan Boyd, Illinois State Police, Boyd said. Mr. Callahan, I have a warrant for your arrest and for the arrest of Sandra Callahan on charges including conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of an elderly person and criminal elder abuse under Illinois statute. He paused for exactly 1 second. You have the right to remain silent. Sandra made a sound that was not quite a word. Dominic looked at me. I looked back at him. I did not say anything. There was nothing left to say that the numbers had not already said more clearly and more permanently than any words I could have offered. Reyes moved forward with handcuffs. I looked out the window at the dark lake 14 floors below, and I thought about Carol, and I thought about the boy in the upper deck at Wrigley Field, and I let myself feel all of it, every last ounce of it, for exactly the length of time it took Reyes to cross the room. Then I folded it away. An engineer does not grieve the fault in the structure. He documents it, he reports it, and he makes sure it never threatens anyone again. January 18th, 2024, Lincoln Park, Chicago, 8:47 p.m. The elevator doors closed at 8:47, and the penthouse went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet after something large and irreversible has moved through them. I remained in the armchair. I did not move immediately. There are moments in structural engineering when a controlled demolition has been completed and the dust is still settling, and the instinct is to rush forward and assess the damage, but the protocol requires you to wait. You wait until the air clears. You wait until you can see what is actually there rather than what the motion suggested. Boyd had stopped in the door before leaving. He had shaken my hand and told me the predicate package was the cleanest he had worked with in 9 years, and that Nora had built something that would not come apart under pressure. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, which was exactly how I needed to hear it. Then he had nodded once to Nora and Marcus and walked out, and Reyes and Callaway had followed, and the three of us were alone. Marcus got up first. He went to the kitchen and came back with 3 glasses of water and set them on the coffee table, moving the guardianship petition to the side without looking at it. He sat on the couch and put both hands around his glass and stared at the floor for a moment. "It's done," he said quietly. Not as a celebration, as a fact that needed to be spoken aloud before it could be believed. Nora was still at the dining room table. She had been writing continuously from the moment Boyd walked out, documenting the evening sequence while it was still fresh, timestamps, exact language, the precise order in which Dominic had produced the document and made his statements. She capped her pen and closed the legal pad and came to sit on the arm of the couch beside Marcus. She looked at me across the coffee table. "How are you doing?" she asked. It was a simple question, and it deserved a simple answer, but I sat with it for a moment, because I wanted to give her an honest one. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "Ask me in an hour." She nodded, and something in her face relaxed in a way I had not seen since she walked through my door on the 3rd of January. She had been carrying the same weight I had been carrying, I realized, just in a different set of rooms. We sat together for a while, without talking much, which felt correct. The lake was dark beyond the window. The city moved below us the way it always does, indifferent to the particular gravity of individual evenings, and there was something oddly steadying about that. After a time, I said the thing that had been sitting in the corner of my mind since Boyd had walked out the door. "Frank," I said. Marcus looked up. "Boyd told me before he left," I said. "Frank's warrant was issued this afternoon. They're serving it tomorrow morning at Dominic's house in Winnetka, where Frank has been staying." I paused. Boyd said he cooperated with the investigation once the financial records came in. He confirmed the timeline and the nature of his involvement in exchange for a reduced charge. The room was quiet for a moment. Frank was 68 years old. He had been my brother for 68 years, which meant he had been my brother for every year of my life that I could remember. We had grown up in the same house in Bridgeport, shared a bedroom until I was 12, stood beside each other at my wedding and at our mother's funeral, and at the ribbon cutting for the first major bridge project I had ever led. He had also, in September of the previous year, signed his name to a document that described his brother as cognitively diminished and in need of court-appointed guardianship. He had done it, Boyd had explained, because Dominic had offered to cover a personal debt Frank had accumulated over 3 years following his divorce, a debt significant enough that Frank had seen no other exit. I did not say any of that out loud. I sat with it the way you sit with a load calculation that does not come out the way you expected, and you go back through the numbers, and the numbers are correct, and you have to accept what they tell you, even when what they tell you does not fit the shape of the world you thought you were living in. "Are you going to talk to him?" Nora asked. "Eventually," I said. "Not yet." She did not push. That was one of the things I had always valued most about her. She understood the difference between a question that needed an answer tonight and a question that needed time. Marcus refilled the water glasses without being asked. He sat back down and looked at me with an expression that reminded me suddenly and unexpectedly of the way he had looked as a boy of about 7 when he had broken something in the garage and come to find me not to confess, but simply to be near someone who would not make the situation worse. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now Boyd builds the prosecution," I said. "The grand jury subpoena goes through, Crane's records get pulled, the financial documents get entered into the case. Dominic and Sandra go through arraignment, bail, hearing, discovery. It takes time." "How much time?" I thought about what Boyd had said when I asked him the same question the week before. "However long it takes," I said. "We built it correctly. That's the only part we controlled. The rest is the process." Marcus nodded slowly. Nora was looking at the dark window. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the 3 of us sat in the particular silence of people who have done something that cannot be undone and found that the silence was not empty. It was the quietest the penthouse had been in 25 days. It felt for the first time in 25 days like it belonged to me again. February 14th, 2024, Bridgeport, Chicago, 3 p.m. I met Frank on a Thursday afternoon in February at the diner on Halsted Street, where we had eaten breakfast together every other week for 11 years, before his divorce made everything complicated, and then the complications made everything else. He was already there when I arrived. He was sitting in the corner booth with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and he looked like a man who had not slept well since January, which I suspected was accurate. He had lost weight. His jacket hung differently on his shoulders than it used to. He looked up when I came through the door, and something crossed his face that I did not have a clean word for, not quite shame, not quite relief, somewhere in the territory between the two where people live when they have done something they cannot undo and have not yet decided what to do with that fact. I sat down across from him. The waitress came, and I ordered coffee, and we waited until she left before either of us said anything. "Robert," he said. "Frank," I said. That was the beginning and very nearly the end of it in terms of formal acknowledgement. There are conversations between brothers that do not require elaborate architecture. The structure is already there, built over decades, and what you are doing when you sit down together after something like this is not building something new. You are assessing what remains standing. He told me what had happened in the way that people tell things when they have already told them once under oath, and the second telling is quieter and more personal. Dominic had come to him in October. The debt was real $260,000, accumulated across 3 years of bad decisions following the divorce. The kind of debt that does not announce itself all at once, but arrives in increments until one morning you realize the increments have become a wall. Dominic had offered to clear it entirely. All Frank had to do was sign the supporting declaration for the guardianship petition and tell the court, if asked, that he had observed cognitive decline in his brother over the past year. "I told myself it wasn't going to hurt you," Frank said. He was looking at the table. "I told myself the guardianship would just be a formality, that you'd be fine." "You knew what it was," I said. "Not accusatory, just accurate." He nodded. He did not argue. "Boyd told me you cooperated once the financial records came in," I said. "Everything I knew," he said. "Every conversation, every date, every document. I kept copies." He paused. "I kept them from the beginning, Robert. I don't know if that matters to you, but I kept them." I thought about that for a moment. An engineer who finds a fault in a structure and documents it before reporting, it is not absolved of the delay. But the documentation still has value. The record still matters. "It matters," I said. "It doesn't change what happened, but it matters." He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his face that was very old and very tired and entirely recognizable. He was 68 years old, and he had been my brother for every one of those years. And whatever he had done in October, he had done from a place of fear rather than malice, which did not excuse it, but did explain it. And explanation is not the same thing as forgiveness, but it is sometimes the beginning of the road toward it. We did not resolve anything that afternoon. We drank our coffee and talked for a while about other things, the neighborhood. The winter, a nephew who had just started college in Madison, and when we left, we stood on the sidewalk in the February cold, and I put my hand briefly on his shoulder, the way I had done at our mother's funeral 30 years before. "Give it time," I said. He nodded, and I walked to my car, and I did not look back. Boyd called that evening with a case update. Grand jury had returned the indictment the previous Friday. Arraignment was scheduled for the first week of March. Douglas Crane had been formally suspended by the Illinois ARDC pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings. The case, Boyd said, was built exactly the way it needed to be built. I thanked him and set the phone down and sat for a long time in the armchair by the window, watching the city lights reflect off the frozen lake. The process was moving. The foundation was holding. All I had to do now was wait for the verdict. October 2025. Cook County Courthouse, Chicago, 2:30 p.m. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected. I had spent 38 years working on structures designed to hold thousands of people. and I suppose some part of me had assumed that a room where something this significant was decided would reflect that scale. It did not. It was a plain room with pale walls and fluorescent light and wooden benches that had absorbed the weight of 10,000 other days just like this one, and the ordinariness of it was in its own way the most serious thing about it. Nora sat to my left. Marcus sat to my right. Boyd was in the row behind us. The judge read the sentences in a flat, methodical voice that made no distinction between the names. Dominic James Callahan, guilty on all counts. 4 years Illinois Department of Corrections. Sandra Marie Callahan, guilty on all counts. 3 years Illinois Department of Corrections. Douglas Crane, guilty on 2 counts. 18 months suspended sentence. Disbarred by the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission, effective immediately and permanent. I watched Dominic when his sentence was read. He was standing at the defense table with his attorney beside him, and he did not turn around. He stood very straight, the way he had always stood, the way I had always been quietly proud of, and he received the words without visible reaction. I did not know what to make of that. I was not sure I needed to. Nora took my hand when the judge finished speaking. She did not say anything. She held on for a moment, and then let go and straightened her jacket, and became a lawyer again, which was exactly right. Outside on the courthouse steps, Boyd shook my hand for the second time. It held, he said, meaning the case. It held, I said, meaning something else entirely. Marcus drove me home through the October streets. The trees along Lakeshore Drive had gone amber and rust, the particular colors of a city settling into the work of ending one season and preparing for the next. He did not fill the silence with conversation, which was one of the things I had always valued most about him. I looked out the window and let the city move past. I thought about a Thursday evening in December, when a man had poured a glass of Malbec and turned his back to the sideboard, and how much had followed from that single moment: the receipt in the garage, the devices under the furniture, the package sent on a quiet December morning through a FedEx office on North Clark Street, the 11 pages from a Philadelphia laboratory, the 3 words at the end of a text message on a January evening. He chose the date. I thought about Carol, who had told me once that the most important thing about a well-built structure is not that it never faces pressure. Everything faces pressure. The important thing is that when the pressure comes, you already know what it is made of. I knew what this family was made of now. All of it. The parts that held, and the parts that had failed, and the parts that were slowly and without ceremony beginning to be repaired. The car stopped in front of my building. I thanked Marcus. I rode the elevator to the 14th floor. I unlocked the door and walked into the penthouse and stood at the window and looked out at the lake, gray and wide and entirely indifferent to the particular weight of that afternoon. I had built bridges for 38 years. I knew what it meant when a structure held. Standing by this window, I finally grasped the true cost of my architectural blindness. I calculated load distributions for a living, yet missed the fatal stress fractures splitting my own home apart. God knows I wanted to believe that structures built with love are inherently indestructible, but human greed doesn't respect bloodlines. Don't be like me. Do not let blind affection silence your core analytical instincts until betrayal forces your eyes open. Proximity does not guarantee loyalty, and vigilance is a full-time necessity. This is why family stories' revenge channels often resonate deeply. They expose the brutal reality behind closed doors. When navigating your own family drama, revenge, remember that absolute clarity beats sentimental denial every single time. My survival relied entirely on turning cold facts into an unyielding weapon. These harrowing family stories, revenge sagas, are cautionary tales proving that even blood must be audited when rot takes hold. To protect your legacy from a similar family drama, revenge trap, demand absolute transparency. Ultimately, survival dictates that we document the cracks before the roof collapses. If you found value in this complex family stories revenge account, please comment your perspective, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more masterfully crafted narratives of family drama revenge. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. Warning: upcoming episodes contain dramatized educational elements. If this intense content isn't right for you, feel free to exit and choose another suitable option.